morning. All right. So, just trying to get set up here. It is January 5th. Happy 2024 officially for everyone tuning in to How to Align with Transformation. Happy New Year. Let's see who's coming in. Happy 2024. That is crazy to me. I was talking about the last time I had traveled to a certain place, like in a different conversation. And I was like, yeah, I was out in California, like, like no more than, like, definitely less than 10 years ago. And I was like, when was that? I was like, it's 2014. And I was like, that's less than 10 years. I was like, oh no, it's 10 years ago. I was like, whoa. We could definitely talk about our relationship with time there, because that 10 years flew by real quick. So yeah, it's 2024. 2024 and on to more is at least my personal motto. My brain primarily, remembers and associates things that rhyme and that are fun. So that's ultimately why I have a motto, and I encourage anyone else, working on their mental health to try to make some degree of like fun or dopamine hit into your perception of what's to come. And 2024 is, it's really the start of the calendar year. I'm just going to go ahead and remind people of that. Like, just also remind you, it's the dead of winter. It is the winter solstice, and that does not actually change until April or March, April, something like that. So if I don't encourage my clients to do New Year's resolutions as much as we're talking about goals and motivation and what mental health really is. If you're not a New Year's resolution person, that's fine. I am a personal advocate for change happens at any point in your day, in the hour, in the year, in the month, wherever it happens, because it has to be meaningful to you. So if you're going to adopt a mental health approach to life and prioritize that aspect, don't set New Year's resolutions. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't set goals, but you don't set New Year's resolutions because let's just say life has a really, especially the last few years, and I don't know if this is just the natural transition to adulthood speaking here, but I feel like the last 4 years now at this point, since COVID hit, has been a series of like really tough situations that, I've helped my clients through, or they go through, or even myself, dealing with a lot of loss, a lot of stress going on. This is definitely a point of where the metaphorical bubble has definitely filled with a lot of inflammation, is what I call it. A lot of people are inflamed, like from an internal standpoint, from an external standpoint, which is why, as I didn't really have like a in-your-face topic for today, other than manifestations of stress and like what does that look like. And so if you're considering, change in your life, or you want change but you don't necessarily know how to attain it, I would really encourage you to start looking and assess your stress, just to get a realistic profile of what stress looks like for you. Because I can tell you, when I go to the internet, and if you were to do a Google of like stress, you're going to get a bunch of definitions. You're going to get a whole bunch of different resources. Like, what do you actually consider? And by the time you actually even probably look at those resources and learn something, you're stressed out. Right? It's like, you can't win. You can't. However, you can win. You absolutely can. However, you probably need to consider either breaking it down into smaller pieces if you're going to do it by yourself, or don't do it by yourself. And so that's why I'm here. And it's hopefully to kind of alleviate that, doing that whole stress evaluation yourself, because it does cause stress. And if you're already stressed, it's going to cause even more stress. And then, yeah, you definitely are going to end up on said metaphorical couch of the shrink's office, because, there's some truth to that. So what I really wanted to try to, start today is like, what is stress? Because when I went to look up the definition, it literally, like, the word stress, I think a lot of people just like, we kind of like, oh yeah, it's like stress, I deal with it. I know I do. Like, I don't brag about my stress tolerance. I just know I have a stress tolerance to a certain degree that is at one point in my career, it was working against me. If you followed me long enough, you know that I share my story as a leading, example of like when you do the work, if it works, you work. Ooh, it works if you work it. That's what I'm trying to say. However, that work in itself is a lot of stress. I don't have the same situation as a lot of people, no physical, biological children, but I have a lot of clients. My work is a lot of my life. But it did take a lot of work, and it did take a lot of stress for me to get the results of change. But I also want to talk on like how you can build that in. Before you can build anything into your lifestyle, you have to figure out what your lifestyle looks like. So the definition of stress really is, from a non-medical standpoint, is the emphasis of something. So right then and there, the concept of stress is kind of different. But if you put it into the World Health Organization defines stress as a state of worry or mental tension caused by a difficult situation. Raise of hands, and this is rhetorical, but like, how many people can relate to that in just the last 3 hours? I had to drive on the highway to get to where my internet is at, because I don't have internet at my new place. So it's like that in itself is just causes mental tension. Am I going to make it in time to go live because I have a consistent time? Am I going to do this, right? That right there is the seedling as to which everything that my world professionally is built upon. Now, let that incubate for 7 years, 7 days. I don't care how long. You let it incubate enough, that thing gets out of control real quick. And so ultimately, the people that I deal with and I work with have had such an exposure to stress that you can't even, for so long. And I don't work with young people half the time. I've now more recently started working with younger people. But if you're not paying attention to what stress looks like in your life, then you're late. I don't like to set the tone, because it stresses people out, to set the tone of someone being behind in their life, because I don't think that that's the case. But by the time that you actually experience and identify that you're stressed out, you are so late to the game in terms of how it is that it's manifested. That does not mean that you are late in terms of addressing it, but you are late to the game if you're just knowing like, oh yeah, I'm stressed out. It's because your body. So this is kind of like one of the Bibles in my therapy world. The body keeps the score, is that your body has absorbed the degree of internal stress from the mental tension of maybe it's being different in this world. Maybe it's looking different. Maybe it's standing out. Maybe it's feeling a standard emotion. Let's go back, like rewind the tape of when can this actually start? This starts literally before you can speak words. You experience stress as a child, as an infant, before you even have the ability to cope with it. So this is why it's so important when we consider mental health, because now people are like paying attention to it. Like, what does it mean? What do you do? Every clinician's at a different standpoint, but what I really do and I work with people is building the recovery lifestyle of it. Given that stress is not going anywhere. Stress is the part of life, and we can focus on trying to eradicate it, but that's not, to me, it's not realistic. So I teach my clients how do you deal and cope with the stress, but then also try to find ways to mitigate it and to reduce it to a certain extent that it doesn't continuously pile up. Because let's start at the micro level, because the first manifestation of stress is having an emotion. Newsflash, if you have not watched any of my other videos, as a human being, you produce energy. Your heart beats. So from a physical standpoint, that's not necessarily stress, but you're creating energy. You create another form of energy in the form of emotion. Emotion equals energy in motion. That literally drives everything that we do. It drives every great visionary that has built this world and built technology. Our lives would literally, the problems would not exist without some degree of energy and emotion. And the great things in this world would not exist with some degree of energy and emotion. But that in itself is stressful, because most people have to make the sacrifice to overlook stress in order to produce, in order to create. So there's been really good positive outcomes, but there's also consequences to that, and sometimes more of cons, right? So, but just to break it down for you, like, yes, the human existence is stressful because you produce, and if you're not aware that that natural production of energy can cause stress because you're given like, basically, let's talk about this in the sense of like, what's that cooking show called? Best Chef or something, right? Part of the challenge of being like the best chef is to take the ingredients that you're given. They're super random. They're like, mangoes and olives, and like make something. So right there in our media, there's a form of stress. That's what we're exposed to because someone else is going through it in order to win this competition. But in some miraculous way, they take the ingredients that are so not supposed to go together and they make a beautiful, like, well-tasting dish, right? So as a human, you're given core emotions. If you really want a representation of this, watch Inside Out from Pixar. I think they did a really good job with like depicting like the human experience, like from a child's level. But if you don't understand that those are your core ingredients to your recipe, then you're not going to know and be able to realize that you are the best chef. So emotional intelligence really comes in the form of being able to use your core ingredients to your advantage and to be able to form a repertoire and an encyclopedia of insight to know and to build intuition. Now, I'm going to try to stay on topic with this one, but in my mind, I just went like, I had a theoretical question of like, well, what about men? Men don't have as many emotions. That's a lie. That's BS. Men have the same core emotions. They've just been societally conditioned to not embrace them. So yes, their emotional intelligence sometimes tends to be lesser than women, but women have been exacerbated and magnified to be the emotional creatures of said culture, and therefore have not necessarily learned to be emotionally intelligent. They've just been learned to be emotional. And then we just like, oh, you're just emotional. And then it literally is stressful. And you see an increase in chronic illness, mental illness, as well as physical illness and disease in women because they don't realize that they're not actually, I'm not calling anyone emotionally unintelligent, but there's not been a development of intelligence intentionally that you just have embraced. You've had a head start in knowing you got emotions, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you know what to do with them. And I see that every day in my practice and also in my own life where I was like, I'm a Cancer. Let's go ahead and talk about that in terms of a, not a Cancer like that caused from stress, but a Cancer from the zodiac sign. We are known to be one of the most emotional beings. And I definitely had that working against me. I had no idea that because I wasn't able to deal with this really intense, big emotion, because emotional intelligence wasn't the most common conversation in my household, and definitely not in a lot of households, that I was being put under stress from a natural state, let alone there being any other variables of like my environment being stressful. The tone, the communication from my parent to a child and being in a power dynamic has a degree of stress. And if we're not realizing that that is just one manifestation of stress, now I will pause real here right quick and be like, please don't stress out, because this is all just awareness. This does not mean that we're doomed, because if we were, then I wouldn't be here today to tell you this is proof of like, you're not doomed. Is that when we experience stress from a young age, that is what leads to a lot of the diagnoses that are stigmatized in the mental health community: attention deficit disorder, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. Some of it is genetic. Not going to take that away from you, but a lot of it is learned person and environment. The fact that I grew up in a divorced household, there's another huge variable that comes in there, let alone an individual parent who is in as part of that power dynamic, not being able to help me cope because they don't know how to cope, because they're living their own existence. And it's, to them, they don't have the luxury to pay attention. And this is, yes, where mental health has become a luxury, and perceived luxury, excuse me, because it's literally your basic need. The concept of needs wouldn't exist if we did not have a brain, if we did not have mental processes that we need to understand and take care of. So when we talk about manifestations of stress, I want to stress that it really starts on such a very micro level of just existing. So if you're telling people that you're not stressed and denying, if denial is anywhere in your reality, then you're behind, because it's going to take you longer to realize and accept, like, oh yeah, I am stressed. Because once you accept that you're in that situation, doesn't mean that you have to accept the BS that you're dealing with that got you there. It doesn't mean you have to accept responsibility yet. It doesn't mean that you have to just accept and you just sit there. That you, once you accept it, is because you're like, oh, this is part of my it literally presents itself to you. And it's like, okay, well, now that you can see the problem, you can do something about it. And I'm not necessarily putting stress as a problem. It's become problematic, but it is a natural part of existence that we have to realize that it's other things. And I'm going to go into the physical symptoms of, like, this is things you pay attention for. But I'm going to start out the gate with the big one, which is your human existence is stressful. Let alone we talk about all the different social constructs that induce stress for different people in different situations. But if you're denying, that's the biggest stressor ever, because you're missing the core foundation of really what stress is. And emotional stress is really that, like, worry and that. I will also say, so the whole genderism of mental health and emotional intelligence, in my book, is BS. I think men have just as much emotions, but they're conditioned to not pay attention to them and deny them. So that's why we're talking about what the biggest manifestation of stress is: denial. So when we deny a person based on gender, or a person based off of just biological sex, is really that male versus female, that an XY chromosome person versus an XX chromosome person does not have emotion. Yeah, that's stressful. That's stressful for me as a professional, honestly, because now I have to, actually, it's quite fun in some ways, because what I do, and this is sarcasm, is that I stress people out for a living. I literally teach them about themselves, but I have to cause stress to do that. I have to have uncomfortable conversations. I have to have conversations where people go back to times where they're experiencing, and this is trauma, let alone stress, but to cultivate change, you have to endure stress in order to cultivate change. So we can, if we're going to be more prone from denying stress and or not leaning into stress, if we have not understood that our own existence is stressful and creates stress. It's a survival technique. So when we talk, or when I talk with my clients about anxiety, because that's probably the most known common generalized anxiety disorder, being one of the more common diagnoses, that's honestly very delayed in understanding how to understand stress, because it's already exhibited physical symptoms and emotional and mental symptoms. So you have the inability to relax or feel like you can stop your thinking. So a lot of racing thoughts. You may have dizziness or physical responses like sweating profusely. I'm a sweater. If you have physical manifestations of like weight gain or weight loss, even because your body it's dysregulated. So it's therefore not able to maintain weight or to be able to keep weight, or needs to have weight on it to feel protected because it's under attack, but it doesn't know that it's literally doing it to ourselves. That's the definition more in terms of physical diagnosis of an autoimmune disorder, of having your immune system attack itself. So it's basically like you against you. And so this is where the emotional and the mental health aspect of physical health in that intersects. And it's just as important not only to go get dialysis and get a surgery or whatever life-saving physical, Western medicine intervention that we've had, but to also do the inner work and understanding how you produce stress that leads to those physical symptoms just as much. Now, mind you, this is a conversation where blame and fault is completely off the table. You can blame the government for not telling us this. They don't even freaking know this. They won't listen. Well, let me not say that. They are less likely to listen because they're worried about how to keep order, how to keep some degree of power and influence. But I'm not trying to change that system. I'm trying to encourage people to take a look at their own system, and which is their life. So whether, a household is a system, their family is a system, but then also what's going on in the internal systems and how that influences the experience of humanity that they have. So we started a little bit more with emotional distress and what stress looks like. So if you're having any kind of sleepless, restlessness at night, but then also during the day, inattention issues. When I work with my clients with attention deficit disorder, it's one of my favorite things to do because it is definitely a shared experience, is that I cause my own chaos all the freaking time. Trust me. I cause my own chaos given that I grew up in a very stressful environment. And my brain, I made this metaphor the other day with someone, is that an ADHD brain is like spandex versus a non-ADHD brain being like wool. It does not bounce back as much. As ADHD, we tend to, or ADD, is that we tend to have the ability to expand and to accommodate because we've been under a certain degree of stress for so long that we know how to keep going, but we continuously are ineffective in the things that we truly desire. So therefore we become self-sabotaging patterns and self-fulfilling prophecies. So what we have to be careful of is the behavioral construct, or the behaviorism behind why and how we've gotten to be that. And when we focus on recovery from that, we start to look at what are the things externally, but then also internal factors that influence how we've gotten there. So we can start mitigating and redirecting some of that flow as to what causes that degree of stress. Because an ADHD brain, ultimately, think of like it likely has a significant trauma history of some sort, or a influence, if it's not like a overt capital T trauma of some sort, that you have a lot of little t traumas, or in the clinical world, what we call ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So that in itself, that existence of that emotional trauma leads to these diagnoses. And then it's super common at that point physically, where your body takes the hit because your body actually absorbs the energy that you create because it needs to function, but it doesn't need to deal with so much in terms of how much it's producing. And that's where chronic illnesses ultimately start. So cancer is number one that is linked to stress. High blood pressure, which heart disease is the number one lead killer in this country. Diabetes, all of these things that go into internal systems, physically. See, I always mess up that word. Physiologically. We can edit that out. Again, I'm going to repeat this, is that if you're having physical symptoms of stress, and you can Google, like, what are the physical symptoms? I'm going to let y'all Google, which I totally am not an advocate for, but I'm going to let you, or you could go to my app, and let me put that link up here. You can go to my app, and I have all of that physical manifestations of stress worksheet, and you check off some of them, you're behind the 8 ball. You might want to change your priorities to include a little bit less probably work, which is that's an environmental stressor, because it's technically, even though we have to work, you don't have to work at that job. You could find a different stressful job, but most people aren't willing to do that because then we got financial stress. We got stress all the way around, right? So what's the common denominator here? Well, one, if you go back and watch my mental health math video, you are the common denominator. So yes, you have to start with you. So you can't change yes, you can change environments and change situations. And sometimes that's easier to start with than the mindfulness and the regulation process, because it can take a little bit of time for the practices that I encourage people to have to actually set in. But there is a lot more worth to do the inner work simultaneously than when you experience stress, because it's not going to stop, and I can't change the system. If I could, we wouldn't be in this situation, because I saw this, these influences from I won't say a young age, but like earlier in my career than like today. And if I had the ability to change it, I live in Sara's world, and I'd be like, this does not work. These student loans can go, they can go, this can go. I wouldn't have moved and caused myself, well, actually I would have moved, but it wouldn't have caused me the degree of stress physically and dealing with certain things. the reason I look like I got somewhat like better outcomes is because I've been training myself for the last 6 years on how to process energy that I create, as well as receiving energy externally, and not letting it have as much of a significant impact because of all the work that I've done on the back end. So these are all manifestations of stress. And I really don't want to go into too much because I'm not trying to talk about what is already in, articles that people know they're stressed. Well, what do you do about it? What's the point of talking about it? Well, the point of talking about it is, one, awareness of it. We can't do anything. Change can't happen if you don't know it's actually happening. But getting a perspective of not being intimidated by stress. The stress in itself is typically rooted in fear. It's typically rooted in like, oh my gosh, in the unknown. And I tell my clients, I don't teach people to avoid stress. I teach people how to stand and have it move around them, because that's ultimately what's already happening. The difficulty is that people have a fundamental belief system that's saying they're supposed to just be happy. They're supposed to just feel this way. They're supposed to just be better. And that's not the reality, because that's a state of denial. And you have to notice that, like, when you see a problem, when you see someone standing on the sidewalk holding a sign saying, I'm homeless, and you don't look at them, I'm not going to say everyone gets stressed out because I can't prove that. I just know when I avert my eyes because I don't have $1 or I'm not willing to give $1 in that moment, it causes a degree of stress, because fundamentally I don't want someone to be homeless. And if I don't recognize that I'm just exposed to that human experience, I'm causing myself more stress to try to block it out and to try to not feel that way than I am to just acknowledging, you know what, I feel that way. I wish I could do more, but I'm doing my best, and I'm doing what I know has to happen for me to live my life. So for me to be able to be a more influential person and accomplish my goals. So therefore I have more influence in the long run for whether it's other generations, other clinicians. I was stressed the heck out 10 years ago when I entered this profession. And there are going to be, you have to experience stress to be able to find balance. You can't avoid it. You gotta keep moving. It's gotta keep in flow, because it's still gonna be flowing in. You gotta know how to, now this, I could be grasping at straws here, but this is just like another metaphor downloading here. If you're ever stuck in a current, like let's say you're in a river, right? And if you're in a river and you're downstream and the current is strong, you're not supposed to swim against the current. I believe, now whoever sees this, my Navy SEALs or like survival experts here, believe you're supposed to swim with the current, but you're supposed to swim either diagonally or perpendicular to the current, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to get to the closest edge of whatever body of water. But if the current's coming here, you're gonna be like, well, I have to swim against it. No, because you're gonna use more energy to resist. You're gonna use more energy to resist a natural flow. What's the flow? The flow is the energy that we produce as human beings. You're going to use more energy in that regard, other than swimming with it, but then slowly slicing off small pieces that where you don't want to go. Okay. Hopefully that reference sticks for someone. Is if you just stop to feel. If you gotta cry, you gotta cry. Sucks. If you don't really want to cry, that's fine. Crying is just one expression of emotional stress, right? It's your body's way of like releasing the tension. It has been like, we're up to here, and it's like, okay, if we cry, maybe you'll pay attention. Maybe if we arrest someone, they'll pay attention to doing, like, you're not on a good path. You don't want to be arrested? Stop doing what you're doing. Like, sometimes it's a sign that people are not paying attention to, because we as a group are not paying attention to it. That's just my opinion. Take it or leave it. So when we talk about those manifestations of stress, crying's one, weight gain, weight loss. Sorry, weird noise. Stressing me out. I think. Anyways, point being, okay. So manifestations of stress. Let's talk about what I haven't. So physical and emotional, a lot of times they go together. Emotion starts first. Physical signs and symptoms, need to address them. If you have any change in pattern or of so this is where, okay, what a pattern physically. So sometimes it can just be behaviorally, but it's like GI upset. If you are vomiting, you're nauseous, all that. If you have any pattern in that's different than what you notice about yourself, then pay attention to that, because physical stress is you're like on a yellow light. I don't actually want yellow light is probably minimizing it. You're at a place where you need to pay attention. If you're having physical symptoms, skin-wise, skin breakouts are a really good indicator of there being some degree of stress internally happening, because your skin is an organ and it's telling you, like, if it's irritated, it's activated, it needs to be paid attention to. Pain is another indicator. If you're experiencing pain, a lot of pain intersects with emotional pain. So 90% of it is a psychological condition, an association that we have with a physical trigger of pain. So it's not that you don't physically feel pain, because you do, but the more pain you feel is really the emotional distress that it is to be in pain, not the actual physical level of pain. Your body, your mind processes it with more magnification because it's a painful experience. So if you're physical pain, that needs to have a mental and emotional component to pain management, not just the medication. But let's talk about a little bit of what's not really looked about is spiritual pain. And what does that look like? Now, I could be kind of walking the line here a little bit, but spiritual pain, I'm going to talk about one on like an individual, well, it's both individual levels, but where does it come from, and kind of what does it look like when I've made sense, and maybe other people can add to this conversation. The first thing that I think of in spiritual pain is doubt. Self-doubt is a spiritual, it could be, someone would say, debate that it can be an emotional experience. I think it's more of a spiritual experience, because if your existence is, you are not sure, you are highly susceptible and vulnerable in the unhealthy way and vulnerability that I promote. And you're in a danger zone because you cannot truly find security in your own reality. So I'm going to take this moment to recognize I doubt myself way more than I'd like to acknowledge, or way more than I'd like to admit, but I have spiritually compromised myself. So spirituality is a component of mental health. It's not all of mental health, but it's a large component. So that's what we're ultimately going to take a look. Whatever spirit, if you're an atheist, cool, I can still have this conversation with you. But because more than likely your mental health is not, your experience has overcome, your emotional stress has overcome your ability to realize what spirituality and soul work actually looks like. You don't have to believe it, but it's just a conversation. If you deny it, go back to the beginning of this video and let's take a look at your denial, and what kind of stress that caused. But if you're experiencing any degree of doubt, self-doubt, you're now at odds with your own self. And it has nothing to do with anyone who triggered it, who gave it to you. It's that is your true experience right there. And that is spiritually compromising. Now, why does it happen? And this is where I tend to have, there's never 100% one reason why, but a lot of it does come back to your parenting. More than likely, you did not have an emotionally intelligent parent or a mature parent to understand and help reinstill self-confidence in a world that cannot guarantee existence. A lot of people that I talk with and my recovering addicts, they spend a lot of energy avoiding the concept of death. And we're not going to go into that conversation today because that's a big one. But that right there causes stress to even think about, let alone to understand what that actually means. But that is a part of my program. We have to have that conversation about what does spiritual ending look like, because if not, you're going to be denying yourself an existence of spiritually that is an inevitable, that I mean, unless you're like Age of Adeline or whatever, you're not staying on this physical earth of when we're having this conversation where the internet exists for you to be able to see this video. You're not staying on this earth forever. And I mean, I would like to meet the person that intends to be. So you're going to go somewhere else physically at some point. That in itself is a spiritual stressor for a lot of people. And that creates doubt. And that right there is a spiritual stressor, in my opinion, because we can't even get very far in understanding the concept of faith, let alone all the issues with faith and like religion, until we understand that just if your own confidence in your reality and what you're seeing is compromised, that right there is an indicator of something going on. Now, you'd be surprised how a lot of doubt really just, so not all of it, comes from a lot of emotional trauma, right? We got to go through that part. But a lot of it is dehydration and a lot of it is malnutrition. And malnutrition not meaning underweight, but a lot of overweight is because you're physically stressed at that point if you're carrying a lot of weight, and you're physically stressed if you're underweight because your body is having to work really hard with very little resources, and that's stressful. So malnutrition, given that it's just unhealthy eating, relationships with food, and that's ultimately when we talk about recovery. That in itself is a whole program that I have of like your relationship with food and how that in itself is how you overcome problems. So for me, I had posted a video this week on my story, if you guys watched that, about how the challenges and the barriers that we have in life, you can go buy a bunch of products to clean up a mess that's like stuck on. But sometimes the answer and the solution is really in the problem. It's matching the problem with the issue and seeing how they go together. So I say that to say, for me, having a food and sugar addiction, my recovery was based in understanding food. It was embracing food. It was instilling a healthier relationship with food for me to be able to thrive. And so the answer is really, or the solution is really I don't think I said that right. The solution is within the problem, okay? So it's not creating a new product. It's not creating a new brand and a new line of things that's like external outside of ourselves. It is understanding where the problem's coming from, because the solution lies within, for most things. So spiritual stress, doubt is one bullet point. And then I was going to talk about this is what we're going to talk about. So this is kind of, again, spiritual and emotional gray area here is the concept of moral injury. Now, if you're not in my world, clinical social work, or honestly in the veterans population, because this is where I learned the term moral injury, was a training about veterans and substance use and clinical education that I have to maintain my license. And ever since I learned that word, I was like, holy crap. Moral injury just makes sense for the human existence. Now, it originates in the basis of the veteran population, or the military population, because of the role and the potential for them to have to go to war and take life. That's ultimately where it stems from, is that because I don't care what religion you were raised in, I don't care what you were influenced by, that we ultimately know taking life is bad. Don't do it. Doesn't stop people from doing it, but if you take life, you have to respect that. Now, when you have to do that because of a job or a role in order to live and for livelihood, there is a moral injury that can predispose at that moment. And if we do not pay attention to that, and how not only that we're exposed, how many people have a veteran in their family? Loved one's dead. My brother, he frustrates the heck out of me. If I'm just exposed to him in that experience, and he's not paying attention to how significantly stressful just that one moment in time is, I'm now not able to realize the impact on me. Media. We watch military movies all the time. You know what? And this is why I wanted to talk about spiritual stress because of something I watched on social media last night. There was a news headline that I guess it was one of those things that didn't get censored right when it was posted, and I saw it right at the right time. But in Philadelphia, a man was pushed in front of a train due to a very, honestly, what presented as a very minor altercation at first that went awry very quickly, and he died because he fell. I don't think it was that man's intention. I don't know, but he had a hand literally placed on this man, and then all of a sudden it happened. And it takes less than that this man he's now responsible for a loss of life, and he will be implicated. That is a trauma, and everyone who watched that has a degree of exposure to trauma and potential moral injury. And you can even hear, and I'm getting chills actually, like recalling it. When I turned the volume on, I heard a woman speaking like, "Oh my gosh, I feel horrible. I can't remember what word she used exactly, but I feel she was literally standing there, is now implicated in having that experience." And she never asked for that. I think she also said that she had a child with her. Like, she's like, "Oh my gosh, my son just, what?" And you can hear the shock in her voice because there's literally it's very, very flat in tone. She's not, I don't know if she was holding the camera or what, but that experience, I'm not going to go into super details because me just talking about it is influencing stress in itself. And I just want to recognize and honor that. So we're going to just breathe and slow down for a moment. That exposure right there, the moral injuries for the guy that ultimately influenced this loss of life, and anyone who saw that video on social media, and I know it's still there, but it does have a censor on it now. It's like, where they tell you, this has been censored to give you warning that you're about to watch like intense things, which I appreciate, but we also have to, I'm all about being informed, but then sometimes too much information is not helpful. And we all know that in some degree is true, but that moral injury is, I think, a spiritual process, because morality is not, we've built laws around it. Law is you don't murder people, you get sent to jail. Like, so there's a physical manifestation of how we address moral injury, but it's not really a concept, one, that's talked about, and it's also not talked about in just the human existence that's not related to the military, but that how we do it as individuals morally. Like, I know eating a whole bag of Reese's is not good for me, but does it stop me? No. Because nothing can stop me when I have that. One, when I was stressed because I've been moving. This is where I have to be aware of my stress. So I'm aware of knowing when I'm doing things that create stress in other places of my life that I can easily deny. Just because I'm aware of it does not mean I have to do something about it right now. Like, we're all aware that a bill is due, but we are more than willing to have a 1 to 3 day pay period of like being on there. The only reason we pay before or on time is because of the fear of consequence, which is stressful. So I think I've made my point. For anyone who has tuned in, please, feel free to ask questions or add to the conversation about, the physical, emotional, and spiritual manifestations of stress and things. I hope I gave you guys something to consider, is like, how does moral injury, how do you perpetuate that? You may not have killed someone. Please don't. Please don't. I promise you, it is not worth it. I've worked inside the prison system, and I promise you, it's not, you'll survive, but you'll be quite stressed. And it's just not fun. Like, but how do you perpetuate moral injury and that spiritual stress that we completely overlook? Because I literally just made this conversation up because it occurred to me. I didn't learn this in school. Maybe I did, I don't know. But I can't really remember. But like, how do we implicate moral injury going against what we fundamentally know is good for us, or ignore it or deny that because it causes us stress to feel like we're not good enough, we're not doing enough? I ate the bag of Reese's at -2 because I was like, you know what? I'm not gonna fully uphold this moral injury thing. I didn't think that at the time. This was more just me recapping and making fun of myself here. But I didn't eat the full bag. I ate like 80% of it, and then I had the other two the next day. So, you know, when because the thing is like the reality is you're causing more stress by telling yourself whatever, it happens. You can't do anything about it because you're not preparing yourself for the next time when there's going to be a bag of Reese's on sale for $1.29 at Ollie's, and you're going to buy them, more or less speaking for myself here, and you're not preparing yourself for the next time because there is going to be a next time. There is going to be another stressful moment. And if you're avoiding looking at how stress manifests in your life, then you are delaying your own ability to be healthier. And that's hard work in itself. But I am also here to hold you guys accountable to the challenge, because if you don't do it, it doesn't get done. And someone's got to do it. So that's all I got for y'all today. I have probably more people tuning in right when I'm about to close, but I appreciate y'all. This will be on my YouTube and my Facebook, full like background. Everything's up there, but I would love to hear your feedback. How does stress manifest in your life? Your own individual manifestations, if you care to share. And yeah, try to do something that takes and alleviates some of that stress just for today as much as possible. So happy 2024. I will be back next week. I don't know with what topic, but we'll see how it pops up. And just be patient with yourselves, and really try to decompress as much as possible. And if you need any resources, please visit my website. I have an app that is all a centralized resource library on how you reduce your stress in the small ways, little bit every single day. Just like saving $1 every day, eventually you will have money saved. Okay. The same thing with emotional energy. So I will see y'all next week. Have a good first week of 2024 and enjoy your day.